Welcome back to WizNugs. Today we're talking about grief.
Most recently, in my life, and as well in Casey's, we've had death happen within the family. And we want to talk a little bit about what that means and some good ways to deal with it.
A lot's been written about the stages of grief, about different ways of handling it and dealing with it, and we'd like to give you the WizNugs take today.
So one of the things I want to mention about it in the WandaVision show, towards the end of the show, and I apologize if there's any spoilers in this statement, but it's been out for a while now, so spoiler alert regardless. There's a part in there where Wanda's come to the realization that she's created, this false world from her own abilities. And the vision that's there talks about love enduring. And it says, what is grief if it's not love enduring? We grieve because we still love, and we're going to miss those people, and they were a big part of our lives, to different extents, of course. But grief is a natural occurrence because it's an indicator of the love that you have for the person, and now that they're not going to be there to reciprocate that love, there's that feeling of loss, and therefore you will grieve. But it is your love enduring that loss, and so. I always tell everybody it's important to remember, even if they're not here, their memories and your experiences and the feelings that you have still persist.
I totally agree. I think another perspective on it is to think about the way in which expectation shapes happiness or unhappiness.
Okay.
If we have expectations that things are going to be a certain way, that this person's always going to be there because they were there yesterday, we expect them to be there tomorrow, they're just going to still be there.
Right.
And I mean, this kind of goes for death, but also breakups or for other life changes that happen.
Mm-hmm.
That you're working at a company and your best friend leaves, and then,
that dirty friend.
It just changes the nature of the job now. The day-to-day is different.
Yeah.
And so, like, grieving that loss, I mean, I don't mean to diminish the loss of death either.
Right.
But thinking about it in terms of expectation, there's time to recalibrate the neural pathways that lead you to the expectation that this person is going to be there the way they've been there before.
Right.
They're not there anymore. That's going to take recoding those pathways to deal with what the new reality is.
So we talked about this before. We talk about when we build up our habits. We have a pattern of doing things. And when there's a disruption to that pattern, everything's in chaos. Everything's chaotic. And how do we handle that? Sometimes we handle it very logical and reasonable, and we approach it the way that it should be approached. And other times it's helter-skelter, everything, throw it out the window, I don't know how to do with anything, everything's a falsehood, I don't know what's going on. And we're all going to have an individual way of dealing with loss. It could be a loss of a person, it could be a loss of a workmate, it could be a loss of a job itself. It could be anything that causes the disruption in our way of handling things. And it's chaos. And if we are more of a person who likes to have that one foot leaning more into order versus chaos, then it could be very problematic and cause trauma, for lack of a better term. And I don't try to use that word loosely, but it is trauma in its
Sure.
sense.
One way of conceptualizing grief is to think about it as a box.
Okay.
And on the side of this box is a button. And when that button is pressed, you feel all of the waves of grief, all of the emotion that goes with it, all of the loneliness and the kind of emptiness and the loss. When an event first happens that causes that grief to start, it's basically a great big ball that is just slightly smaller than the box.
Mm.
And it's pushing that button constantly because it's just that big.
It's just crammed in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the ball shrinks slowly over time.
Right.
And it's going to eventually stop connecting with the button directly. And then it's going to start kind of bouncing around inside the box as it shrinks. And it'll hit that button. And at first, it's going to hit the button a lot. Mm-hmm. It's going to be constant, and then it's going to be frequent, and then it will start to diminish. As the ball gets smaller and smaller, we might go days, weeks, months, possibly years, without the ball connecting with the button and activating that grief.
Right.
but the ball never really goes away.
Yeah.
And the button never really goes away.
Right.
The ball's just bouncing around, and it's going to hit that button. And it could be completely unrelated. It's not that, oh, I was thinking about my dad the other day, and then the button went off. It could be that, you're just sitting at the movies, and the character says a line a certain way, and you're just activates it.
Yep.
And you're just sitting there, and then, everyone suddenly is like, why? What's wrong with him? What's going on? Were you okay? Or occasionally people will say things like, that was years ago.
You're still dealing with that? You're not over that already? Well, that just goes to prove that it doesn't ever truly go away. Your feelings never truly dissipate and go off into the beyond. That's not how it works. Once you've built up something, it will sustain itself. It may not be in the forefront any longer, but it's still there. So it could be years down the road and you're watching a movie. The movie I'll use as reference is Click. And there is the moment in Click where he gets to pause the last time he sees his dad. Played by Henry Winkler.
The Fonz.
Yeah. And he's realized what a jerk he's been and how absent-minded child he's been, their son he's been. And he realized that the last time he saw his dad, he was just so, like, whatever, Dad, I don't have time to deal with you, I'm busy. And so dismissive. Yeah. And he paused on that with that controller, and he's just like, and he's heartbroken. And it's a touching moment. And for me, it was touching for the, like, okay, even though I don't feel like I was dismissive to my dad, I felt the other way around, I still connected with that scene. My son, for some reason, cannot watch that scene because he just loses it. He goes emotional, completely emotional. And I'm like, I'm here. I'm still here.
I'm still here.
I'm glad.
We can still have time together.
Yeah. If you feel that way.
Change your ways, Ebenezer.
That's right. If you feel that way, I'm here. If you feel like you're going down that pathway, make time for me. I will be more than happy to be around you and do that stuff. And I can, you just don't know sometimes. You're just going along your life and you think everything's all right. And something happens, someone says something, you see a thing, whatever, and all of a sudden that it hits that button. And you're back to where you were again and you're experiencing those emotions again.
And that kind of keys into one of the most important messages that I feel like we can share about this topic is that feelings, anytime really, but especially when it comes to grief, your feelings, your emotions are not something that you have to bottle up and put in a box and push it to the side. Right. You might have to in a specific moment to get through, if you're driving, you got to focus on the road.
Right.
And there are times where you've got to stay focused on the task at hand. But in a general sense, allow yourself to feel the emotions, whatever they are, whether you're mad at the person for things that they didn't do or whatever.
Yeah.
Or conversely, mad at yourself that you didn't do things differently while they were there. Feel them, let them be. Recognizing that there's the seen and the unseen of every situation.
Yeah.
For me, one of the things was my dad and his comic book collection.
Okay.
He has a huge comic book collection. Well, had. And some of it was inventory from when he had a comic book store.
Okay.
That it was whatever was on hand in the store. And he just never got around to going through it, ever.
Yeah.
It was packed up, it was in boxes, and it was in the garage. And it was that way for decades.
Yeah.
Looking at that from my perspective, having to kind of pick up the pieces and looking at it going, gosh, Dad, why didn't you finish the project?
Right.
Okay, what did my dad do that wasn't working on this project? Oh, putting food on the table for 7 kids. Like, he had a lot going on.
Right.
So for me just to look at this one thing in isolation and say, gosh, he was awful because he didn't do this. I'm mad at him for the thing he didn't do. What about all the things that he did do? Can I appreciate those in the moment when I'm feeling frustrated? Again, let the feeling be, sit with it, soak it up, and then talk to yourself about, okay, hold on. It's not entirely fair to just say, well, he didn't do this and he didn't do that. What did he do?
Right. And so on that note, the person that passed away in our family was my wife's mom. And what I've told her is, I want you to feel what you need to feel. And don't apologize for crying. And don't apologize for needing to have time to just lay in the bed and be remorseful and to grieve. That's fine. Two things. First of all, don't act out on your emotions. You're feeling probably your worst you've felt in a long time, if not ever. Don't act on those emotions. Let yourself feel them, but as we talked about before, your emotions aren't you and they don't define you. You just have them, right? Like you have clothes, like you have other things that you possess.
Yeah.
So don't act on them, because there are going to be a lot of deep, sad thoughts that come across your brain, and for everyone it's going to be different. But don't act upon those feelings. Just let yourself feel them, let them pass. And the other thing is too is don't, like you just said, don't focus on the negative things, the things you didn't do, the things that could have been done or whatever. Focus on all the happiness and the joy and the wonderful times that you had, and make that your thought process. Again, it might be hard because grief is different for everybody, and usually, not always, usually it means I'm going to delve down into sadness and depression type of feelings. But remember all the awesome things that you have, and the reason that you're grieving is because of those times. So focus on that. Focus on all the wonderful things that they did, all the wonderful things that they taught you, all the good times that you had. Yes, you're going to miss them. At the same time, celebrate who they were and what they meant to you. That doesn't mean you're not going to be sad. It doesn't mean you're not going to have grief. You are. But don't make that your focal point if you can't. Have your feelings, work, get through them, let them happen, and then start to remember the person they were and what they represented, and let that be the remembrance of their life, not the last moments, the last few, fractions of their life.
And there's a couple of exercises that kind of go along with that.
Right.
One of them is the classic, I think we've mentioned it a couple of times before, about write the letter.
Yes.
Sit down, write a letter. What would you say to them if you could talk to them now? Write it down. Get the thoughts and the feelings, put them into words that engages both sides of your brain. So sometimes when things get stuck in the right hemisphere, which is the more creative, chaotic, or emotional side, processing them through the left hemisphere causes a different way of handling it, a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And to put it into language it can be huge. It can be a game changer in terms of actually getting through and moving through it instead of just being stuck in it.
Yeah, and there's no time frame on that. Take all the time that you need. You don't have to write it out and send it out immediately. Take time. Think about it. Process.
And we're not even talking about sending anything per se. Just
sure.
If you're going to write this letter, and you just write whatever comes to mind. If you want to express your anger or your love or your sadness or whatever,
right.
Whatever you wanted to say, or even just thinking about making a list of the things that, these are the things about them that I love. These are the things about them that I hated. These are the things about them that, if it's just list making and not a letter specifically, writing it down and processing mentally, working through that is powerful.
I would think another way of being able to deal with it, and you can, give your 2 cents on this one. If you had a thing that you shared, maybe it was like a going out to do a thing, or it was like a painting class, or whatever it was that you did something together, and now you can't do that anymore. Try to invite someone else to come along and do that, and then you can do it in the memory of them and pass along that tradition, carrying on traditions. Whether it was like with my mother-in-law and my wife, if they had traditions, now for my wife to start carrying on the tradition with her daughter or with someone else, right? To carry on a tradition so that you're continuing it on and you're doing it in remembrance of them, and you're passing on a tradition onto your kids, and then hopefully onto their kids and onto their kids.
Case in point, that was one thing that after my dad passed that I specifically, there was a little while where I couldn't pick up some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But then there was a time when I just decided, you know what, I'm going to start collecting comic books again, because it reminds me of him. And when I sit and read, it's just a nice time.
Yeah, remind you of the feelings that you had at that time, right? That your dad was there. He shared his collection with you. He taught you the proper etiquette in order to have a handle of comic books, so that you kept it pristine as much as you could. And you remember those times, and you're like, this is awesome. This is great. I want to share that with my son. I want to be able to do that too.
And there's the funny thing is that he's we did for a little while read together, and now he's like, no, I'm good.
But you made the effort, right?
Yeah.
But it still has meaning for you, even in the case that the tradition is not being able to be carried on. You made the effort. You want to make sure that, this meant something to me. And I'm not going to force you to participate, but I want to share it with you.
Yeah.
And then they can decide as the individual whether they want to continue that or not. But at least you did what you could.
So going back just a little bit to not acting on the feelings, some great advice that I heard was don't make any major financial decisions for at least a year. Now, I'm not one that's going to put a specific timeline on it, but if you think about it, there's going to be a lot of things like, oh, I can't be in this house anymore because it reminds me of them. Or, well, now I've always wanted to do this thing. I couldn't because I was here for them, but now I'm going to go move across the country, or, to make one of these major changes. But if you do move across the country or sell the house or whatever, that might be something that you're feeling like in the moment, but longer term, you kind of wish you didn't.
Right.
So it's one of these things of when you're in that moment where you've got big emotions and you're processing and just feeling and handling it, try not to make the big decisions right away. Give it some time to breathe, and then you can come at it with a clear head.
Right. In the case of like family, if you feel like when the event first happens and you feel this tremendous feeling of loss, one of your first reactions might be, I got to get closer with my family, and I got to make sure that we're all okay and everyone's good, and because this is all of our mother, and we got to make sure. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying sit on it for a minute. Give yourself some time to process the loss and process your feelings. Let people have their grief as they will, and then come back to it. There's nothing wrong with having a close-knit family. I think it's great. But at the same time, know that you have an individual life with individual family, your own family, and making sure it's something that you're going to be able to do and everyone's willing to participate. I think, like we just talked about with your son, sharing a tradition, we might think it's the best thing on the planet to be able to pass on something that we got from our dad or mom. But they're like, yeah, I'm not into this at all, right? And you don't want forced participation.
And that's okay.
Yeah, and it's okay if they don't, right? I would rather someone be honest and say, yeah, I know this meant something to you, but I don't feel the same way. Is it cool if I don't do this? And I'm like, yep, it's perfectly cool. Because you're you, and if you're going to participate in this, I want you to be fully into it and not haphazardly or half-hearted into it. And that's okay if they don't want to be. I think there's a realization for that too. It's like when somebody passes, there's all of a sudden this giant feeling of I need to make sure everyone feels that they're included and everybody feels like they're part of the family. But everyone's going to have their own subjective reality of how they want to deal with their own grief.
And sometimes family dynamics can play out in less than healthy ways as well.
Right.
If you've got, one sibling that wants to tell everybody else how they should be feeling and how they should be handling the problem. Right. That can be troubling to those who are maybe not quite as vocal or are feeling different things.
My negative experience in my personal life with a parent person passing away was starting to decide who gets what. Mm-hmm. I will tell you right off the bat, I am not materialistic in any particular sense of way. That doesn't mean I don't own things. It just means I don't put any sentimental value into objects. So if, like, my big collection is my figurine collection, but if something was to happen and I lost it, oh well, it's gone. I'm not going to grieve over it. I'm not going to be sorrowful over it. I don't put feeling value into these things. It's just things that I have. Mm-hmm. So the idea, and again, this is me. This is my subjective view on it. When somebody passes and people start arguing about who's going to get what, I don't want to be any part of that, because that's not who they were. That's something that they owned. That's a different thing completely.
Yeah. And
if somebody else had owned that, then it would have no value to you. Right? If that was your neighbor Dave's set of silverware, who'd care? None of us would care. So you only care because our mother owned it or something of that nature, right? So it has no real value besides the sentimental value you put into it. So are you going to use them? Are you going to eat with it? Is it going to have any kind of value except for the sentimental value that you put into it? No. Okay, well then why worry about it?
So my mom recently lost her husband. She had remarried after my father passed. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that she sent out, I feel like is pertinent here. She sent out a little story about the story called it grief groceries.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So short version, I'll paraphrase because I don't remember all the details anyway.
Sure.
Asking somebody who's grieving, what can I do for you, can be less than helpful.
Okay.
Because most of the time they're going to be in a different mental state where they're not processing in the same way as like if you think about like a project manager who's going through and they're like, okay, well, here are the 12 things that we need to do to get through this project.
Right.
Oh, well, if somebody's here is offering, you do step 4, that'd be helpful. But there's no checklist for like grief. There might be some odd specific thing of like, something about the car, I think. Could you check out and make sure the car is maintained, I guess? I don't know.
Because you're not in that mindset at that time.
But for the most part, it's going to be like, I don't know. I appreciate you putting yourself out there and stepping up, but I don't know what to tell you, so I'm not going to call you back and say, oh yeah, here's something you can do for me. So the story talks about grief groceries being, hey, are you going to be home on Thursday at 8? Yeah, I guess. Okay, I'm going to have some stuff delivered. If you're there Thursday at 8, then I'll have it delivered Thursday at 8.
If that doesn't work for you, let me know what time works for you, and we'll have some stuff delivered for you.
And they called up, any number of these delivery services, and they had just groceries. Here's a couple of microwave dinners that you can pop in without thinking about it.
Yeah.
Here's a couple of, some sweet things, some salty things, so that if you just want to sit there and eat your feelings for a little bit, go for it.
Yep.
Sometimes you just want that craving that comes up, but if you're not thinking about groceries in that moment, and so to be able to have, and maybe some vegetables and maybe some fruits, some fresh things, because again, someone who's going through the grief process isn't going to be probably in that state of mind to be handling those sort of things. So bringing over, just here's some groceries, some stuff that you can hang on to that will get you through at least a couple of days.
For what I would do is offer myself, look, I went and got some gift certificates or gift cards for your favorite restaurant. We don't have to go right now when you feel like it. Could be a month from now, could be 6 months from now, whatever. These don't have any expiration date. And then when you're ready, we can go out, we can have dinner, we can talk about what's going on, or we can not talk about it at all. It's going to be completely dependent on how you're feeling at that time. But I want you to know that as much as what I can do is when I can, whenever, you let me know what that is. But here's something that's already handled, already taken care of. You don't have to put any thought process into it, except for when you would like to go. You let me know, and we're gone. We'll go do that thing.
And if you've got the kind of relationship where you could do these things, dishes and laundry are part of those things that they stack up, right? So if you can come over, don't wait to be asked. You see dishes, just do the dishes.
Well, like you said, when you talked about dishes and laundry, maybe if it's like car maintenance, like you said, or yard work, anything of that nature that was being handled by the person beforehand, and now I am just in such an emotional state. I don't know what I'm going to do, and I can't figure things out. I still got to work. I still got things to take care of, but my daily schedule didn't include these things. That was the other person's responsibility.
Or even if it was theirs, but now all their time and mental energy is taken up with something else. Being able to take some practical, physical things, yard work, dishes, laundry are the big ones that come to mind. Is just they're not going to wait. They're not going to. They'll sit, I guess. But to be able to come over and be helpful in a real meaningful, practical way,
right? Tidying
up, taking out the garbage. That if you're visiting somebody who's grieving, before you go, maybe you wanted to do something really practical and helpful. Right. Think about maybe some of those things.
There's nothing too small or too insignificant based off our own subjective opinion that it's not going to be helpful. We don't know how that person is truly dealing with the loss. So whatever we can do, even if it seems insignificant, picking up the trash, right? Whatever it is, do those things if you can do so. Do them and show them that, look, I don't know what I can offer, but I'll help you get through the daily stuff that you just don't have time for right now.
And remember, reach out and include still. Yeah. So if you've got other events that are happening, I can't talk to them because they're grieving, they're going through. Reach out.
Yeah.
Just reach out. Sometimes people just need someone else to say, we're doing a thing. Will you please join us?
Yeah, definitely include them. For like in my wife's case, for today, I said, hey, you want to come up to Casey's place? You don't stay there, but we're going to go ahead and record our podcast, but take the car, go visit your friends that you have in the local area, go do stuff so that you're not just sitting here and moping. Because Saturdays were mom and daughter day, right? And so you're not, no, but she made a plan with my son and my daughter, and they're going to go visit the mausoleum where her ashes are being kept, and then they're going to go to some event afterwards. So I was like, okay, as long as you're not here, just dwelling on it. It's been a couple weeks, but it's still prevalent. So in closing, there isn't a perfect way to express grief. It's going to be based on your own personal interpretations and your own subjective reality of how you feel about this particular thing. So don't think that you have to behave a certain way or do certain things in order to grieve the way that you need to grieve.
Listen, pay attention, reach out, do what you can to help.
So we want to thank you again for joining us on WizNugs, and we'll see you next time. Take care.